Hi. Welcome to Finance, Business and Investing. You've probably heard of Warren Buffett and his wildly successful Berkshire Hathaway, but have you heard of his right-hand man, Charlie Munger? Charlie Munger has been Berkshire Hathaway's vice chairman since 1978. He was a successful lawyer, real estate developer, stock market investor, and hamster breeder prior to joining Warren Buffett. More on this later. According to Charlie Munger, the most difficult part of becoming financially independent is obtaining the first $100,000 or $1 million. Today, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett are two of the world's wealthiest men, and neither inherited their fortunes. They are both self-made individuals. They've also both had tremendous success as stock market investors. A little-known fact about Charlie Munger, which we'll discuss further later, is that he ran an investment partnership in the 1960s and 1970s that outperformed recently acclaimed investors like Katie Wood and even legendary investors like Peter Lynch. While it is difficult to imagine a more direct path to that elusive first million than the one Buffett took, the path for most of us, and Munger was no exception. Life happens, and the accumulation of wealth may be temporarily halted or even reversed due to unforeseen circumstances. As a result, I believe you'll find that the story of how Charlie Munger became a millionaire is a great complement to Warren Buffett's story. Charlie Munger was born on January 1, 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, but our story starts in 1930 with Munger and Range. Perhaps you've heard the story about the would-be golfer who was taught how to handle a golf club by his single-digit handicap father before he could walk, who won the Junior World Championship 6 times, and who is now tied for the most PGA Tour wins in history. Or perhaps you've heard about the father's 3 daughters, who were determined to turn any healthy child into a genius as long as they were highly specialized. He chose chess for his 3 daughters when they were 6 years old and drilled them relentlessly until they became the greatest in history. These are Tiger Woods's, Susan Sophia's, and Judith Polgar's stories. They owe their success in life to an early, intense, and narrow focus on a single study. Charlie Munger's achievements stem from intense study as well, but instead of being narrowly focused, they span across a wide range of subjects. Munger was moved ahead in elementary school due to a fair amount of home-schooling and reading by his mother Florence Munger. He was known by his teachers as a smartass Munger, and he didn't particularly idolize his teachers, believing he had found better ones in the many biographies his parents had purchased for him. One of Munger's most famous quotes is, "Make friends among the eminent dead," and he himself made friends with famous dead writers such as Mark Twain and former American presidents such as Benjamin Franklin. Also included are the dead and everything in between. According to Munger, a diverse set of skills is required for subjects as complex and broad as stock market investing. Though he didn't realize it at the time, he was 6 years old and reading biographies that he had received for Christmas. Munger has stated, "In my entire life, I have known no wise people in a broad subject matter area who did not read all the time. There are no zeros." He is also known as the book with legs Munger. Collecting things has always been a part of human nature, and when I was a kid in the 1990s, it was all about Pokémon cards. My parents thought it was a terrible waste of my money to spend it on these pieces of paper. I didn't agree, possibly because it wasn't my money. In the 1930s, parents had completely different complaints. Charlie Munger was a hamster breeder and collector when he was younger. Yes, the living kind, and at one point, he had as many as 35 of them living in the family basement. It was fun to have these rodents in a variety of colors and sizes. As a result, the kids exchanged them. Charlie's mother, on the other hand, apparently had had enough at the age of 35 and forced him to get rid of them. Buffett and Munger's grandfather. Charlie Munger worked at Warren as a teenager. Ernest's grocery store, owned by Buffett's grandfather. Ernest was extremely strict. He forced young boys like Munger to work 12-hour shifts with no meals or breaks for a pittance of $2. No, not $2 an hour, but $2 for the entire day. Charlie used to work here on Saturdays, so we can use that information to make an initial estimate of how far he had progressed toward that first $1 million at this point. Let's say his savings ratio was around 50%. While I haven't found any information stating how long Munger stayed at the grocery store, we can assume he had around $100 saved at the age of 14 in 1938. Due to inflation, this is worth more than $1,800 today. Congress later stated that his grocery store experience taught him a valuable life lesson. He needed a simpler job. Warren Buffett apparently learned the same thing when he worked in the shop years later. Munger and high school Munger would have enrolled in 1938 at Central High School, a large public school, had he been born just a few decades earlier. We might never have seen a Charlie Munger because high schools had only recently become common in the United States. During the period 1910 to 1940, the number of 15 to 18-year-olds enrolled in secondary school increased from 18% to a whopping 73%. Charlie came from a family of judges and lawyers, so had he been born a few years earlier, he might have been one of the lucky 18%, but he still studied Munger and physics. Charlie Munger left Maha after graduating from Central High School and never looked back. In 1941, at the age of 17, he attended the University of Michigan where he chose to major in mathematics. Charlie also happened to enroll in a physics course and was fascinated with the problem-solving process. Their responses to questions were as simple as they could be. According to Isaac Newton, force equals mass multiplied by acceleration. Warren Buffett believes that the value of a business equals the value of its cash flows from now until Judgment Day. Charlie Munger believes that you marry the best person you can find and, perhaps most importantly, who will have your back. The officer in charge. Unsurprisingly, there was a high demand for men to serve in the military during this time period, and Charlie enlisted in the Army Air Corps after 2 years at Michigan. It was shortly after his 19th birthday. For a time, the program would elevate him to the rank of second lieutenant. He studied meteorology, which was deemed necessary for pilots at the time, at the prestigious California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, also known as Caltech. Today, the acceptance rate for this university is around 6%. While some of Charlie's Army comrades were not as fortunate, Munger was sent to Alaska. The war wasn't exactly raging here, and Munger demanded crucial skills. It came as a pleasant surprise. He learned to play poker during his military service. Poker is a game in which you must learn to calculate odds and apply a probabilistic mindset while remaining extremely opportunistic. The odds are usually stacked against you, and you must learn to throw away the majority of your hands. When the odds are clearly in your favor, however, you must remember that opportunities don't come along very often, so you should bet big. This isn't just a good poker lesson, and what I'm trying to imply here for investing. It's a good life lesson in general. Munger and Nancy. While in the military, Munger married Nancy Huggins, who was introduced to him by his younger sister. Warren Buffett met his first wife in the same way. So I guess I'm screwed as an investor because I met my girlfriend on Tinder while the Second World War was still going on and the threat of long or even permanent separation loomed. If you've seen the movie Pearl Harbor, you know exactly what I mean when I say that young love became widely glamorized by the public. I promised you I'd return. And when it came to love, Munger was perhaps too contrarian for his own good, as this marriage appears to have been rushed, at least in retrospect. They married in 1945, he was 21 and she was 19. If Charlie had any material wealth at this point, he has failed to mention it. While Charlie was aware that compound interest was a force to be reckoned with, he had let it slip away until now. He'd been working on something else. He'd been amassing knowledge, and soon he'd be able to use it to make a buck. Munger, the Harvard students, Charlie's grandfather, Thomas Charles Munger, was a federal judge, and Charlie's father, Alfred Munger, was a lawyer. So the next step in Charlie's journey was more or less predetermined. He has stated that he was born into it. In 1946, Charlie attended Harvard Law School. He had some difficulties getting in because he did not have an undergraduate degree, but he was assisted by family friend Roscoe Pound. He was the former dean of the school. I know, it's very convenient to have such connections. Munger, the lawyer from here, it was game on. Munger passed the California bar, a requirement for lawyers in that jurisdiction, in 1949 and joined the firm Wright & Garrett, now known as Music Peeler & Garrett in Los Angeles. He was 25 years old at the time, had saved $1,500, and his monthly salary was $275. In 1949, the median monthly income for an American household was $260. Munger. Being an attorney gave the investor a foot in the door for other types of projects, especially for someone as well-rounded as Munger. Some of the specific dates in the early 1950s are a little hazy. Munger had a client named Ed Hoskins who owned a company called Transformer Engineers throughout this story. The company produced highly specialized transformers for military equipment, which saw a surge in demand during the Korean War. Investors disagreed with Hoskins and his venture capitalist. Munger recognized an opportunity to invest in the company. The primary lesson from this early investment in Munger is probably a negative one of understanding what not to do, because the Korean War ended shortly after Munger invested and demand for transformer engineers' products dropped dramatically. The moral: do not put your money into a sloppy business. According to Munger, the difference between a good and a bad business is that good businesses make one easy decision after another. Bad business forces painful decisions. Time and again. Warren Buffett likes to say that when a manager with a reputation for brilliance takes on a business with a reputation for bad economics, the business's reputation is preserved. Hoskins and Munger did eventually sell the company for a good profit in 1961, but only after many years of struggle. This investment's significance cannot be overstated. He taught Munger to prioritize quality businesses. This not only allowed Munger to produce better returns than people like Peter Lynch and Katie, but it also shaped Warren Buffett's investment philosophy, allowing him and Munger to produce the best investment track record in history. Setbacks and Munger. As stated in the video's introduction, Munger's path to his first million was not as straight as Buffett's, and in 1953, Munger experienced his first real setback. He and Nancy Huggins divorced, and as Charlie's daughter Molly would later recall, he lost nearly everything in the process. Nancy looked after the house and the children while Munger moved into a nearby bachelor pad. Also, it appears that the divorce was not entirely Charlie's idea. Charlie's son, as if that wasn't enough. Teddy was diagnosed with leukemia shortly after, which was essentially a death sentence back then. There wasn't much that could be done about it. Medical bills were also not covered by insurance. And Charlie was watching his son fade away. Teddy died in 1955 after taking such a massive mental and financial hit that most people would most likely not recover. But what amazes me about Charlie's story is that he was only getting started. You should never do so when confronted with a heinous tragedy. Allow one tragedy to become 2 or 3 as a result of your lack of will. MUNGER'S. There are numerous mental models. The preceding quote is a stunning example of someone who can see the world as it is without allowing emotions or biases to guide their actions. How does Munger think like this even in the most trying of circumstances? I believe that part of the answer is that Munger has a number of mental models through which he views the world and analyzes specific situations. I'll now show you 6 of these models, which I know Munger has used extensively throughout his life. You'll get a lot of takeaways in a short period of time. So pay attention, because the first mental model has already been revealed. It is to have a variety of mental models. Munger is quite meta when he says that to a man with a hammer, every problem appears to be a nail. The razor of Occam. Consider this statement. Occam's razor is the concept that less is more. He is a bad person because he is a bad driver. He has foul breath. And he also killed a guy. Wouldn't it have been easier and more accurate to simply say that he's a bad person because he killed the guy? In many situations, less is more, and you should always try to narrow down problems and their conclusions to avoid noise and opportunity costs. If you put money into company A, you cannot invest the same funds in both companies. It implies that you must make a trade-off decision. According to Munger, investing is essentially the task of achieving the lowest possible opportunity cost. Perhaps company A. When compared to company B, it appears to be appealing. But, if you knew about companies, you would never have looked at company A. Again, Lollapalooza, a Lollapalooza effect is achieved when a sufficient number of positive variables are combined. 1 plus 1 is no longer 2, but 3, and 1 plus 1 plus 1 is no longer 3, but 6 or 71, depending on how you look at it. For example, Charlie argues that Coca-Cola has been such a huge success because it was able to combine a great product with powerful stimulants, clever marketing, ease of availability, and social proofing. Remove one of these 5 and Coca popularity colas may fall to that of Dr. Pepper. Remove 2 and Coca-Cola would no longer be on the market at all, remaining opportunistic. Most people aren't fortunate enough to have a plethora of opportunities thrown their way all the time. So, for God's sake, don't be a timid little rabbit when an opportunity presents itself. If you remove the top 20 transactions from Berkshire Hathaway, such as Geico, Coca-Cola, The Washington Post, National Indemnity, and so on, its track record would have been a complete farce. Invert always invert is one of Charlie Munger's all-time favorite lines. combined with all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there to invert. It means to reverse engineer it. It entails beginning with the end goal in mind and then deciding how to get there. Of course, in the case of Munger's line, it's with the intention of not getting there. When you think about it, the entire video is inverted. We are now looking at an example of how an investor can achieve that invert always invert. There are many more models which Charlie uses, such as the model of safety staying within your circle of competence. Mean reversion, for example. So I may have to make a video about this topic at some point. If you'd like to see a video like this in the future, please help me out. Also, if you like this video for the YouTube algorithm, please leave a comment. While I may sound like a broken record, make Munger's models down below. Munger and Nancy. In 1955, Charlie met Nancy-2 Nancy, which was a new event in Munger's life. Borthwick, Barry. Charlie was 32 when they married in 1956. Nancy had 2 sons from a previous marriage and Charlie had 2 daughters. So, during this period, Charlie's family grew through mergers and acquisitions. Later, when the two had 4 new children together, there would be some organic growth as well. By the way, I do not endorse this breeding strategy. Even though Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett were both from Omaha and had both worked at Buffett's grandfather Ernest grocery store, they had never met in person. Well, not until now. At least in 1959 they were introduced to each other through mutual friends when Munger was returning to Omaha to take care of his father's estate. Munger and Buffett hit it off immediately. And the rest, as they say, is history. It has been frequently emphasized on this channel and elsewhere how influential Charlie Munger was in Warren Buffett's career, as well as how Warren Buffett is the most successful investor in history. Before Warren Buffett met Charlie Munger, I suppose that makes sense. He had been investing almost exclusively in what his mentor Benjamin Graham referred to as cigar butts. Companies that were incredibly cheap while also having financial metrics that only a mother could love. According to Munger, quality and price, there are 2 factors to consider when investing. The trick is to get more quality for your money. Munger was willing to pay a higher price as long as he could get outstanding quality, whereas Buffett had been taught to just get some quality, but on the condition that it was very cheap. Charlie, because of his prior experience with Transformers, engineers, had a different perspective here, and soon Buffett was listening to him. However, Buffett had an even greater influence on Munger, and this hasn't been discussed as much. In fact, you could argue that Buffett was the reason Munger eventually left law and began to focus solely on investing. He told Charlie that while law is a fun hobby, he believes he can do better. The real estate developer, real estate as an alternative to stock market investing, is something that Munger focused on much more intensely in its early days than Buffett did in a 2006 Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting. In the 1960s, Charlie started out in real estate development because it required very little capital and you could magnify brainpower and energy, or I should say brainpower and energy could magnify small amounts of capital in a huge way. That was not true in securities. Real estate development, the process of buying land, building something on it, and then selling it, is truly something which can be magnified. Munger completed 5 different transactions in Los Angeles over the course of a decade. When he and Nancy bought their family home in Hancock Park in 1960, they bought a property on June Street, brought in the wrecking ball to demolish the old house, and sold off a portion of the property as a new lot. On the other side, they built a house for their family. The second project, which was far more ambitious in scope, was brought to Charlie through his work as a lawyer. Munger was working for a man named Otis Booth and couldn't stop himself from giving Otis business advice. Booth's grandfather had owned a property near Caltech, where Munger had previously studied. Booth's father didn't think they had any use for the property and wanted to sell it. Munger was going to handle the probate settlement, but he had seen that due to the explosive growth that was happening in Los Angeles at the time, land developers were becoming wealthy quickly, so he advised his clients to construct their own apartments on the property instead of selling it. If you think this is such a good idea, Charlie, you should join us with your own money, and the project was completed in 1967. It took some time, but they were able to recoup $500,000 on a $100,000 investment. Meanwhile, Charlie began his 3rd and 4th projects with a man named Al Marshall. Al Marshall and Charlie purchased properties near a shopping center in Alhambra, as well as others on Huntington Drive near San Marino. Also, after the Celtic project was completed, he did another one with Otis Booth where they applied some of their first project's learnings. They had noticed that the ground floor apartments were selling like crazy, so they decided to focus entirely on that and on trees, lush landscaping. That is what sells. You spend money on trees and you get back. Triple guess I was wrong in a sense earlier when I implied that opportunities do not grow on trees. Charlie Munger did become extremely wealthy as a result of his efforts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Munger, 1 foot out in 1962. At the age of 38, Munger left his job as a lawyer at Wright & Garrett. While Buffett's astute observation that law is fine as a hobby, but I think you can do better, may have had an impact. I believe the 3 main reasons Munger decided to change his career were as follows. First, Munger was told by a senior partner that his duty was to be no more than the 3rd smartest person in the room. The client is always the most knowledgeable. I'm the 2nd smartest person. After that, any cleverness appears to come from you. To say the least, this wasn't Munger style. Howard Buffett, for example. Warren's firstborn son has stated that his father is the 2nd most intelligent person he knows. Munger is the most astute. Second, I had noticed a pre-existing issue with the profession. People he liked working for didn't get into much trouble, so there was no work for him. Meanwhile, the dishonest and distasteful people caused a lot of trouble and generated a lot of work, but he didn't want to spend his time with them. Finally, lawyers face a magnified keeping up with the Joneses problem, also known as keeping up with his Super Jones. Many of lawyers' clients are wealthy entrepreneurs who are accumulating assets in the form of businesses for themselves. Even though lawyers can earn a lot of money, especially nowadays, they are rarely accumulating assets of the same kind, especially if they try to compete with their clients for fancy material things. In 1962, after 13 years as a professional lawyer, Munger allegedly had $300,000 to his name. Before leaving the business, he had earned at least half of this amount through his investment activities. He did, however, manage to start a new firm with a few colleagues from his previous job in 1965, which is now known as Munger, Tolles & Olson. Even today, it is a very successful law firm that is also very picky. If you did not graduate first in your class from an elite college, you should probably avoid applying here. Munger, the sage of securities, you must have had a terribly busy year in 1962 because, in addition to starting a law firm, doing real estate development, and having children with Nancy, he also decided to form an investment partnership, similar to the one that Warren Buffett already had, by forming Wheeler Munger & Company with a fellow named Jack Wheeler, later replaced by Al Marshall. They were joined by some outside investors, but they did not focus on expanding the business. Here are the annual results of the partnership's investment returns from 1962 to 1975, as compared to the S&P. During the same time period for 14 years, the Munger's partnership compounded at 19.8% per year. That is quite impressive, but it becomes even more so when you consider the S&P. Compounded at only 5.9% with dividends reinvested over the same time period. It even outperforms the legendary investor Peter Lynch and his track record at the Fidelity Magellan Fund from 1977 to 1990. When comparing relative performance to the S&P. When you look at Katie's ARK Innovation E500 is better than her track record. TF. From 2015 to 2020, she will combine her previous management experience at Alice Bernstein Strategic Research from 2006 to 2013. Unfortunately, there isn't much public information available about the partnership's investments, but we've gathered some tidbits for you. In her book, Alice Schroeder describes the snowball that Munger did in British Columbia Power, which was trading at around $19 and was allegedly being taken over by the Canadian government at $22. Munger put up all of the partnership's money and then some in this deal, but only because it was basically certain that this couldn't go wrong. Munger's proclivity to leverage his bets caused his partnership to lag far behind the index during the 1973–1974 bear market. But, as you can see, he made amends. He believed that if you aren't already wealthy, you should take some risks in order to become wealthy. Another opportunity comes from Janet Lowe's book. Behind the scenes, Berkshire Hathaway billionaire Charlie Munger boarded into a company called Fund of Letters, which was a closed-end investment fund trading at a significant discount to its assets. In other words, it was a play by Benjamin Graham. Finally, after researching Warren Buffett's top 25 investments of all time, I'm aware that Buffett's, Wheeler's, and Munger's holdings occasionally overlapped. Blue Chip Stamps and See's Candies are two examples of the company's diverse retailing. Munger becoming a millionaire. When all was said and done with Munger's real estate developments, he had approximately $1.4 million. Munger's exact year of departure is unknown, but he clearly became a millionaire before then because he also had assets elsewhere. But I believe it was around 1967. Despite some setbacks along the way, Charlie Munger became a millionaire in his early 40s, and there you have it. Let's have a quick recap. Charlie Munger became a millionaire by reading Breeding Hands. Now, you're probably not learning about odds and probabilities, working as a lawyer, figuring out the difference between a good and a bad business, seizing opportunities to make powerful connections, developing real estate, and taking quite big risks investing with leverage. If you haven't seen how Warren Buffett became a millionaire even faster than Charlie Munger, check out this video. As Warren Buffett has stated, there's more than one way to invest in heaven. Until next time, cheers.